So the Dave Matthews Band is going to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Congrats to Dave and the boys. I've always been a big fan. So they got in on the fan vote. The funny thing is, the fans voted for them in 2020, and they didn't get inducted. They were the first band voted by the fans who didn't get inducted. So the fans was like, nah, we're voting for them. And they voted for Dave and the boys again in 2024, and now they're getting in. So congratulations to them. But I started thinking, if it wasn't for 1994, I don't think Dave and the boys would be in this position. So what happened was in 1994, two things happened. Two major things happened. So Seattle was still running high. You got grunge. But what happened was Kurt Cobain dies tragically. That was the first blow to Seattle. The second blow, it really wasn't a blow, but it was the beginning of the shift. Pearl Jam sues Ticketmaster for unfair practices. And they were justified. The only problem was Pearl Jam didn't get a lot of help from their fellow artists. We flash forward 30 years later, and we have the Taylor Swift fiasco with Ticketmaster, and Ticketmaster's being sued again. So this whole thing could have been rectified 30 years ago if Pearl Jam had more support. But it just proves that Ticketmaster they just can't get it right, man. They always try to screw the fans. So I also think that the record companies was trying to move away from Seattle anyway, because what happened was in the late 80s, a lot of these bands were playing together for a while. And because they were in Seattle, they were signed to independent labels, but they were self-sufficient. They did their own merchandising. They handled their own tours because they figured like no one's being signed from Seattle, so we're just going to make sure we're independent. We just do our stuff independent. So when Nirvana blew up and then Pearl Jam blew up, Pearl Jam actually came out before Nirvana. 10 came out before Nevermind. But when they blew up, these record companies started pouring in, signed all these bands from Seattle, and record companies being record companies, they say, hey, why don't you do this and do that? And Seattle bands was like, bruh, no, we got this. Don't worry. And I don't think the record companies like that. And plus there was like drug use in the Seattle scene, not all of them, but it was probably difficult sometimes with the drug habits of some of the players. So the record companies was trying to move out of the Seattle scene. And it seems like in 1994, they said, put out anybody who was not grunge and or from Seattle. So in 1994, all these new acts popped up. Sheryl Crow comes out. Hootie and the Blowfish comes out. Blues Traveler comes out. The Beastie Boys drops Ill Communication, which was a departure from License to Ill and Paul's Boutique because they were sample heavy. And the Beastie Boys was including instrumentation into that album, which would follow them with Shake Your Head and all this stuff. And then there's Dave Matthews Band. And the Dave Matthews Band, and all these acts sounded different. Dave was sounding different from Hootie. Hootie was different from Blues Traveler. Blues Traveler was different from Sheryl Crow. They were all different sounding acts. Because I don't think the record company knew what the next sound was. Because even the next year, No Doubt comes out, that ska. The record company had no idea what was happening. So the Dave Matthews Band, the reason I like them, one, they're unique. Dave Matthews has a very, very unique voice. And two, their basis is jazz. They're a jam band that has a jazz foundation, which is a crazy combination. And to be honest, they'll probably be the last jam band inducted into the Hall of Fame, unless there's another fan vote and someone else gets in. Jam bands are kind of like the Grateful Dead, where they just play and play and play. But the jazz element is actually interesting because their drummer, Carter, was a fantastic drummer. He was a jazz drummer. Stephen, their bassist, had a jazz background. Leroy, the former saxophonist who tragically died in 2008 due to an ATV accident, he's a jazz saxophonist. There's Dave. Dave Matthews. He played guitar since he was 9 years old, and he's from South Africa, so he has that background in him. And then there's Boyd. Boyd wasn't even part of the band. They was looking for a fiddler for Trippin' Billies, I think. And Boyd played on that track. And that's a wonderful track. And they liked Boyd, and Boyd stayed until he left. There was some sexual allegations against Boyd, like back in 2018, and he left, which is unfortunate. But he didn't go to jail or anything like that. So I think the case got settled out of court, I think. So there's the jazz part of it. And then they're a multicultural band. Fiddler, violinist black, saxophone is black, drummer black, Dave's white, and Stefan's white. Like, we don't see too many multicultural bands. Sly and the Family Stone, Prince and the Revolution. It's not that many. So they're a unique stew of music with different musical backgrounds. It's there's nobody who sounds like Dave Matthews before, and nobody sounds like Dave Matthews since. And I was starting to think, like, and this is where I feel like they weren't. This is the only time they would ever be signed. Like, if I think back 25 years ago, would Dave Matthews be signed during the era of TRL? Probably not. Would Dave Matthews would have been signed 10 years ago? No. There's probably a lot of groups who sounds like Dave Matthews. If you go on TikTok, you'll find a ton of bands. Oh my God. I come across this one band yesterday. They're from Atlanta, and they had like a xylophone. It's like, oh my God, this is wonderful, but they'll never be signed. There's probably a band that's kind of like Dave Matthews today. Let's take that band from, I'll find the name later, from Atlanta. It has a xylophone in it. They'll probably never be signed to a major label, because major labels, they just follow trends. Well, if what's their likes like? How many followers do they have? Oh, well, what about the music? But a lot of these acts, they might have a strong following on TikTok. They might have a strong following on YouTube. Just like the Seattle bands, they probably book their shows, do their merchandise, and they probably have a nice middle-class living. And they'll never be signed by a major label, which is so heartbreaking, because I miss bands. I miss hearing it's like, oh yeah, we're influenced by jazz. Like, when I was younger, I played drums, and I wanted to play drums like Stuart Copeland for the Police, because I loved how he held his drumsticks. And what I didn't know, and I tried it, and I couldn't do it. I could do it a little bit, but then I found out later that Stuart was a jazz drummer. Before he joined the Police, he was a jazz drummer. Same thing from Charlie Watts from the Rolling Stones. I miss hearing these stories. I miss hearing like, oh yeah, I grew up playing jazz. And this is the reason I play this way. If you got kids and they're in the instruments, watch the Dave Matthews Induction. Now, I don't know if any of these things will pop up when they're in their induction process, and I hope there is, because I miss seeing kids carrying instruments. I miss seeing a kid carry a saxophone case. I miss kids carrying drumsticks. Instrumentation is really losing out. Like, I get technology and things like that, but there's nothing like hearing the story of, yeah, we got together. Like, Dave Matthews initially, he started off by himself, and then he met Carter and Stephen, and then they were a trio. And then they added a saxophonist, and then they added Boyd. I miss hearing how a band comes together. And even moving forward, I don't know how many more bands will be inducted. There'll be a few, but as we get through the 2000s, it's almost like, how many bands are going to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? I don't know. So if you're a fan of the Dave Matthews Band, what's your favorite song? Like, if you just look at the discography, like Too Much, So Much to Say, Satellite, what would you say? Crash into me. Oh my God, they was so good. When I was listening to Trippin' Billies, I was like, man, Carter's drumming is fantastic. The jazz thing is so embedded in them. Because the thing, if you go to a jazz club and listen to jazz artists, they get off like on solos. They get off being inspired by the back and forth. The saxophonist plays something, the drummer plays something, the piano player plays something, the bassist plays something. The Dave Matthews Band is the same thing, and I think this is why they still have a great following in tours, because I think people just enjoy hearing them play. The jazz element, the jam band element, they got hits. It's a festive atmosphere when they're in concert. It's always crazy to me. People say, oh, I like Dave Matthews. Like, how can you not love instrumentation? Okay, fine. They're not crunchy guitars. Fine. But don't you appreciate good music? Don't we need more good music today? They're a great band. And they're still friends. They lost some members, but they're still on tour. I like Dave Matthews, one of the most unique voices ever. One of the most unique bands ever. And like I said, it's good. There's not going to be very few artists who has a jazz background tucked into the Hall of Fame as we move forward. So appreciate these guys while you can. There might not be another one.